Yes, Ms. Sivakamaram.
So I'd like to continue our programme of reading into the record a number of statements that have been provided to the inquiry by residents and bereaved witnesses.
Yes, very well.
As has been noted already, although I may be reading some extracts from those statements, the entirety of the statements is admitted into the record.
Yes.
Now, if I may begin with the statements, two statements rather, from residents that were not present in Grenfell Tower at the time of the fire, before turning to a number of statements from bereaved witnesses. Mm-hmm. The first statement that I will put into the record is that of Mr. Salah Douale, and that is reference IWS 795.
Yes, thank you.
Now, if we can turn to page 6 of that statement, we'll see that it was signed on the 29th of June 2018 under a statement of truth. And that statement consists of 6 pages. I would ask the entirety of the statements put into the record.
Yes, thank you.
Now, Mr. Douale had only moved into flat 7 of Grenfell Tower on the 10th of June 2017, so it was 4 days before the fire took place, and he moved in with his 2 sons. On the night of 13th June, Mr. Douale was out in the evening, and he only returned to Grenfell Tower at around 1:15 a.m. And I'll pick up the account that he's provided to the inquiry at paragraph 10 on page 3 of his statement. Rather, I'll turn to paragraph 11. As said, he had returned at around 1:15 a.m. And at paragraph 11, he says, "When I arrived at the tower a few minutes later, I saw 3 fire engines around the bottom of the tower, and people were congregating all around the base of the tower. I saw Suhaib and Abdi Rahman standing in the playground next to the tower on the west side. I met them, and we just stood there and looked up at the building. When I arrived, the fire was not that big and was coming out of the window of a flat on the 4th and 5th floor. It was, however, burning upwards. The flames were orange, yellow, and blue in different places. I tried to walk towards the tower to get in so we could try to save some of our things, but my sons stopped me, saying that the fire was serious and we should not go back inside. After my arrival, the fire started to spread up the building quite rapidly. The fire looked like a tube burning up one side of the building. There were loud noises coming from inside the building. They sounded like explosions. I don't know what those noises were. It was a really shocking thing to see. I've never seen a fire like it before." And I propose to put that into the that amount of the statement into the record.
Yes, thank you.
The second statement that I will be reading from is that of Gimja Teki, who is a resident of flat 202 on floor 23 of Grenfell Tower, and the reference for that statement is IWS 992. Now, Ms. Teki was a resident of flat 202 of Grenfell Tower, as I've just stated. If we can turn to page 12 of her statement, you'll see that it is signed on the 21st of May 2018 under a statement of truth, and it consists of 12 pages in its entirety. I'll ask that her statement is also put into the record. The only paragraph that I would wish to draw to your attention, as I'd stated, Ms. Teki was not present on the night of the fire, and I'd refer you to paragraph 36 on page 6 of her statement. Ms. Teki says, "As stated above, even though I was not physically present at the fire, I saw the fire unfold on the news reports on TV. When I first saw the tower in flames, I was devastated, and my first thought was for Marco, Gloria, and all my neighbours, all of the people that I knew who were presumably burnt to death in the fire. This was especially true of all the young children that I knew and had known all of their lives." I would note that Ms. Teki was a resident. She had moved into the flat in 1998 and had lived there with her daughter Lydia until 2015. Gloria Trevisan and Marco Gottardi, who she's referred to, had been staying with Ms. Teki since April 2017. They had met through a family friend. On the night, Ms. Teki was staying at her daughter's home and was not present when the fire started.
Right.
I'd ask that statement as well as admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
So I'll now propose to enter into the record a number of statements from bereaved relatives of residents who sadly passed away in the fire at Grenfell. The first statements that I will read into the record are those from friends and family of Mr. Anthony Dyson, who was a resident of flat 194 on the 22nd floor of Grenfell Tower. I will also note that family members of Mr. Dyson and those of the witnesses those are the statements I'll read into the record are present here today.
Yes, thank you.
Now, the first statement that I will read into the record is that of Mrs. Cordelia Dyson, and the reference for that statement is IWS 242. That statement consists of 15 pages, and if we turn to page 15, we'll see that it's signed on the 17th of May 2018 under a statement of truth. Now, Mrs. Dyson was married to Anthony Dyson, and they have 3 adult sons. I will propose to read or pick up her account of the events of the night of 14th June, or the morning of 14th June, on page 10 at paragraph 121.
Yes, thank you.
Now, Mrs. Dyson says, I went to bed in the chalet, and then at around 1:22 a.m., I got a phone call from Tony. I automatically thought that it had to be something to do with Charlie. I had no idea it was about the fire at the time. I knew something had gone wrong because Tony would never call late unless it was an emergency. I remember the call was definitely at 1:22 a.m., as I have a clock which is next to my bed in the chalet. The first words that Tony spoke were, Cordy, Cordy. I said to him, what's the matter? I thought he said, the flat is on fire. I said, what? He said, the flats are on fire. I said to him, Tony, get out of there. You're on the 22nd floor. He said, no, it's okay. They're coming to get me. I said to him, who is coming to get you? He said, the fire brigade. I said to him, all right then. And then he said, you'd better let me go in case they want to get in contact with me. I said, all right then. Tony had said that he had rung the fire services beforehand. Tony only had his mobile phone. He does not have a house phone. I estimate that I spoke to Tony about 5 or 6 times that night. We were calling each other. I estimate that I called 999 at least 4 times. The first time I spoke to Tony was at 1:22 a.m., and the last time I spoke to him was at around 2:42 a.m. I was using, and the numbers have been redacted. I then rang him back and said to him, have they come to get you yet? He said that the black smoke was too much and that he could not breathe. I said to him to go to the bathroom and to fill the bath and put some towels in there and to put it around his face and to make his way downstairs. He said to me, you don't understand, Cord. The black smoke is too much and I can't get to the front door. I said to him, try, Tony, try. Try and get to the front door. He said, for fuck's sake, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Is this the way I'm going to go? Is this how I'm going to end my life? I said to him, shut up and listen to me. I said to him to get his phone and his charger and his car keys and put them in a bag and put them down his trousers. I said this because when he gets out, he could call us and say that he is out. He then said to me, there is someone on the other line. I then rang the fire services and I spoke to the Kent department and I explained to them that there was a fire in Grenfell Tower and that my husband was on the 22nd floor. They passed me over to the London Fire Brigade department and they said to me that they were going to get him out. I said to them, please do not leave him there to die. They said to me that they knew he was there and they were fully aware that he was there and they were going to get him out. I believe during this time, before I spoke to Tony again, that either Tony rang Alfie or Alfie rang Tony and he was speaking to him. I had put the TV on around this time and I could see how fast the fire had spread, but Tony did not see this at the time. I then spoke to Tony again around 15 minutes later. In the meantime, I know that Tony was talking to Alfie. Alfie at the time was at Sinead's place and Charlie was with his girlfriend. I then spoke to Tony on and off at the same time. Alfie was calling him and I was calling the fire services. I could not tell you what time this was. He then said, I'm going to jump out of the window. I said to him, you're not doing that to my boys. I said to him, just get out, Tony. At the time of these phone calls, I could hear the smoke alarms, but they did not sound like they were in the flat. To me, they sounded like they were coming from outside of the flat. He then said to me that the lights had gone out. I said to him, just keep touching your phone, and there was a light. He then heard his door go. Someone was knocking on the door. I believe at this time he was in his sitting room. I don't think he was sitting down. I think he was panicking a lot. He then said, they are here, they are here. He was about to switch me off, and I said to him to keep me on the phone. He went to the front door. I could then hear a man's voice, and the man was screaming, help me, Tony, please help me. I could hear a baby crying and screaming. These are the voices that haunt me. I could hear the panic in the man's voice. I do not know who they were. Tony said to him, I can't help myself. I do not hear the man's voice after this. I presume this is when Tony must have gone back into the flat. From then on, I could sense a change in Tony, and he was more panicking and he was crying. I said to him to throw himself down the chute, and he kept saying to me he could not breathe. He then went back into the living room, and I knew he went back there as he said to me that he could hear helicopters. I said to him that he should smash the windows as they were melting so they would know where he was, that he was there. He said that he could not and said, for fuck's sake, the flames are at the window. This was the only time that he mentioned the flames. He also said to me, screaming at one point, that he was going to die, and I said to him that he was not. He also said to me on the phone that his feet were burning. I then came off the phone and I spoke to the fire brigade again. He always spoke about the black smoke. He said that it was coming through the windows and the doors. He said that the black smoke was getting worse throughout our phone calls. In the meantime, I was calling the fire services, and so was Alfie, and they kept saying that not to call him back, and that they were going to get him down. One of the last phone calls I had with Tony, all of a sudden, it was really weird. He was saying that the fire brigade must be outside to get him, because he said that the black smoke had turned white. I do not know what he was thinking, but at the time I presumed it was because he was dying. He then started to beg me, saying, please don't let me die. And I kept screaming at him, saying, you're not going to die. Get out of the flat. He then said to me that he loved me and that he has always loved me, and said for me to tell the boys that I loved them as well. He then said, Cord, this is it for me. This is when I started to panic, and I kept saying to him over and over, you're not going to fucking die, you're not going to die. I then rang the fire brigade again and said to them about the fire, and they said not to call him back and that they were going to talk him down. I did not call Tony. I rang her back around 15 minutes later and spoke to the fire brigade, and she said that they have lost contact with him at 3 a.m. This is when I spoke really angry and screaming at the fire brigade because they left my husband to die. I spoke to the fire brigade at least 3 times. This was between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. I tried to call him again to see whether I could have contact with him, but the phone was just constantly ringing out and was ringing until 8 a.m. in the morning. This is the reason we thought he must have got out. Throughout the time that I spoke to the fire brigade, they always told Tony to stay and that they would get him out, and this is the reason he stayed. I always said to him that he should have tried to get out. It was only on the last phone call I had with them that they said that they suggested that he should try and get himself out. And that's where I propose to stop with reading from that statement.
Well. Thank you.
So you have heard that Mrs. Dyson and Mr. Dyson had 3 sons.
Yes.
Alfie Dyson, who Mrs. Dyson referred to, has also made a statement to the inquiry, and I'll propose to read that next. The reference is IWS 241. And he says in his statement that he had spent time with his dad on the 13th of June 2017 and had learnt of the fire through family members in the early hours of 14th June. For his statement at IWS 241, if we turn to the last page, page 8, You'll see that it's signed on the 17th of May 2018 with a statement of truth. I'd ask that the entirety of the statement is put into the record. And I would then propose to pick up from page 4, paragraph 64, Mr. Alfie Dyson's recollections of the events of the 14th of June.
Yes, thank you.
He begins, "At the beginning, I did not know anything about the fire. I had a missed call from my dad, but I did not answer it as I was asleep. The first time I knew about it was when my partner, Sinead's mother, called her and told my partner that there was a fire at Grenfell Tower. This was at around 1 a.m. to 1:10 a.m. I then called my dad straight away, and he was telling me that there was a fire at Grenfell Tower. I told him straight away that he should leave the flat. He said to me that he was not going to leave as the firefighters have told him to stay. I kept pleading with him to leave. He kept telling me that there was black smoke everywhere. At first, I did not think it was a bad fire. I just thought that it was a small fire in a flat below. I did not realize the extent it would be. I constantly said to him that he should leave. I cannot remember how many phone calls I made to my dad, but I do remember some of the contents of them. I know my dad was on the phone to me, my mum, and the firefighters. We were all trying to communicate with each other at the same time. I remember we all called him throughout between 1 to 3 a.m. I remember one conversation I had with him, and they were always lengthy phone calls. I would say that I was on the phone to him each time around 20 to 30 minutes. I remember him always being in the passage, and he kept saying the smoke was gradually getting worse each time. I know he opened the door and then shut it again because the smoke was so thick. I remember during one conversation that he was saying that the smoke was filling the flat, and he was coughing and saying that he cannot breathe. I know at one point I told him to go to the bathroom and to fill the bath with water and to block the doors. I am not sure if he did this, but I could hear him doing something in the background, and then at one point I could hear it was like a towel over his mouth. I could also hear the tap running, and I told him to run the cold tap. Between the phone calls with my dad, I must have spoken to the firefighters more than twice. I remember calling, getting through to Surrey, and explained to them that he was 65 years old, and that they said not to worry as they will get my dad out. I know my partner also made multiple phone calls to the firefighters as well. I believe she phoned them more than me. I remember one phone call, they said they were unable to get up there yet. Dad always talked about the smoke, but he never spoke about any flames to me during this. I do not think he would have taken pictures or videos. I know my dad spoke to fire services. I do not know how many calls he made. At around 3 a.m., I rang him and asked him what was going on. He said to me that they are not coming, and then I told him to get out of there again. I kept saying he needed to get out, but we both knew he would not get out. We had a 5-minute conversation between me and him, and he was saying to me that if he did not make it, that he loved me and my brothers, and I should not forget this. He said that he was going to attempt to get out. The only reason he went was because the fire services finally told him that he needed to make his way out. I heard him opening the door and heard him talking about the black smoke. I knew that he had his tablets, phone, and keys on him. I was told by the firefighters to turn off the phone and that they would talk him down. I then spoke to the firefighters to find out what had happened, and they told me that they lost contact with my dad at 3:07. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Thank you very much.
I will then propose to read from the statement of Charles Dyson, also known as Charlie Dyson. The reference to that is IWS 239. Charlie Dyson is the brother of Alfie, and he's also the son of Tony and Cordelia Dyson. Mr. Charlie Dyson lived with his father, Tony Dyson, in flat 194, but on the night of the fire he was staying at his girlfriend's house and so was not present. This statement also consists of 5 pages. Turning to the 5th page, you'll see that it's signed on the 17th of May 2018 with a statement of truth. And I propose to read firstly from page 1, paragraph 3, You'll note, as I've said, on the night of the fire, I was with my girlfriend and was staying at her flat. I did not know anything about the fire until the next morning when my mum called me. Mr. Charlie Dyson continues at paragraph 6 that my dad and I lived at 194 Grenfell Tower. He was originally on the 19th floor until the regeneration. After the regeneration, it was moved to the 22nd floor as the old boxing gym was removed and they added 3 more floors. My dad was renting the flat through the council. My dad and I were the only ones living in the flat. We did not have any pets at the time. When my dad and I moved into the flat, it was fine originally. We did not have any problems and complaints. It was only until the regeneration started when things were going wrong in the flat. I would then continue from Mr. Charlie Dyson's statement at paragraph 34 on page 3. At this paragraph, Mr. Charlie Dyson continues, they changed the door in the regeneration. The door was slim and skinny, and it was not a strong door. It was white and had like a cheap wood feel. The old door was light but strong. They both had spring-back features on them. I remember there were 2 hinges on the new door, one at the top and one at the bottom. I don't remember about the hinges on the old door. There was no damage to the door. I don't remember any modifications being made to the door. All of the neighbours had the same door changed. There were gaps in the door. There was a clear gap at the bottom. There were also gaps around the side of the door. I would then continue at page 4. The last paragraph I'd proposed to read from is paragraph 39, where Mr. Charlie Dyson says, the windows were changed and there were drafts through them. They were like a white plasticky type of window. I could feel the drafts. And that's where I propose to end with that statement.
All right, thank you very much.
Finally, I propose to read from the statement of Hariboy Dyson, and the reference for this statement is IWS 672. Mr. Hariboy Dyson is the 3rd son of Tony and Cordelia Dyson, and he has provided a statement that consists of 4 pages. Turning to the 4th page, you'll see that it's signed on the 29th of May 2018 under a statement of truth, and I'd again ask that the entirety of the statement is admitted into the record. I do not propose to read paragraphs from this statement, but I would note for the record that the inquiry has carefully considered the entirety of this statement and the other statements provided by the family of Mr. Dyson in their entirety.
Yes, well, they'd all be, they'll all form part of the evidence before the inquiry, and it's right that I should make that clear and thank Mrs. Dyson and her sons for taking the trouble to make these statements. It's important that we know about them. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's 2 other statements made by friends of Mr. Anthony Dyson that I would also propose to put into the record at this stage.
Yes.
The next statement is that of Miss Dawn Ryan, and the reference for that statement is IWS 250. This statement consists of 10 pages, and if we turn to the 10th page, you'll note that it's signed on the 21st of May 2018. So it's on the 11th page as the signature. And there's a statement of truth on the page before, which is actually page 9.
Yes. Thank you.
I'd ask the entirety of that statement is put into the record. There's also 2 exhibits to that statement, DR1 and DR2, and the reference for those exhibits are IWS 247. Now, Miss Ryan had lived in Barrington Walk, which was close to Grenfell Tower, with her husband, 2 children, and their dog, Captain, since 2015. The whole family was at home on the night of the fire. A number of Miss Ryan's family members were also close by and were in contact on the night of the fire, and a number of them were present outside Grenfell Tower. It's also noted within the statement that Miss Ryan's niece is Tony Dyson's granddaughter, and that's explained in one of the exhibits through a family tree.
Yes, thank you.
I would pick up Miss Ryan's account at paragraph 10 of her statement on page 3. Shortly before paragraph 10, Miss Ryan explains that she was woken up by her phone ringing as her niece had called her to tell her that there was a fire at Grenfell Tower. She continues at paragraph 10. On the phone, Lily Rose said there's a fire in Grenfell Tower. She said it looks quite bad and I think you need to get out. My initial thought was, okay, there's a fire, but why is she calling me in the middle of the night to tell me this? As I said, in my experience, fires are really common on estates. They're usually put out quite quickly without spreading to other flats, and that's the end of it. When she said Grenfell, even though I knew people that lived there, I did not know which tower she was referring to at first. She explained it was the big one around the front. She was insisting it was really bad. She said they were going to my mother's place as she could not watch any longer. I would then propose to continue at paragraph 28 of her statement, which is on page 6.
Yes.
Ms. Ryan sets out in the intervening pages how she waited at her flat with her children for a period of time before deciding that she wanted to go to her mother's house, where her niece had said they'd already gone. At paragraph 28, she continues, we stayed at my mum's in Shepherd's Bush for a couple of hours. There were a lot of us there. My sister, niece, nephew, and his girlfriend were all there, and there were 3 dogs. Whilst I was there, Karina and Lily Rose told me that my niece's grandfather, Tony Dyson, had been trapped in the tower and that they saw the fire engulf his flat. He lived in flat 194 on the 22nd floor. His windows were on the western facade of the tower. Karina and her son recounted the events of earlier that evening. My nephew had been with Karina's son, watching the fire from outside of Bramley House. I am not sure of their exact location, but Karina's flat is at or near the point marked on her exhibit. They were on the telephone to Tony, who was in his flat trying to get him to leave the tower. At first he was reluctant to leave, but by the time they persuaded him, he said he couldn't leave as the door handles were too hot to touch, and he could not open the door. In the last calls with him, her nephew could apparently hear him screaming for help, saying, please help me, I can't get out, the heat's coming up. And then finally he said, please tell my sons that I love them. From where we were standing, Karina, her nephew and Karina's son had a full view of the tower, and an hour or so after, there was the last conversation with Tony. They saw the fire engulf Tony's flat. I knew Tony very well. I would see him once a week or so. And that's where I propose to end with that statement.
Thank you very much.
The final statement related to Mr. Tony Dyson is that of Winston Waris, and the reference for that statement is IWS 916.
Yes.
This is a statement that consists of 18 pages. And if you turn to the final page 18, there's a signature dated the 21st of May 2018, and there's a statement of truth on the preceding page, page 17,
Yes, thank you.
which relates to that signature. I'd ask the entirety of that statement admitted into the record, and I would just very briefly address Mr. Dawaris says in his statement that he lived on Hurstway Walk for around 8 years before the fire at Grenfell. On the night of the fire, his daughter was staying at the property. He was a friend of Tony Dyson, having gone to school with him many years previously, and would pick up his account of the fire at page 2, paragraph 4.
Yes, thank you.
Now, Mr. Dawaris says, the fire started at 12:54 a.m., I understand. This was whilst I was asleep in my flat. I became aware of the fire when my daughter woke me up. I think it must have been at around 1:30 a.m., although I cannot be certain. My daughter said, Dad, Grenfell is on fire. It's going to fall on top of us. She really thought that the tower was going to collapse on top of us when she had seen Grenfell Tower burst into flames. Just as my daughter woke me up and I saw the fire for the first time, the police were knocking on the door and telling us to get dressed and to get out. I looked out the window and it looked like an inferno. It looked like nothing I had ever seen in my life. It was painful and sad. You could see straight away that not many people would escape from it. The police warned us that the tower might fall on us in Hurstway Walk and that we had to get out. I hurriedly put on some clothes and was ushered out by the police into Latimer Road, where there was a lot of confusion and commotion. Now, Mr. Waris also says that he's had contact with Tony Dyson on the night of the fire, and I would pick up his account from page 4, paragraph 26 of his statement. As he said, after he was evacuated, sometime after, he continues, "We walked away and I was standing by a bus stop when I heard a blonde woman, I did not know her, talking on the phone. I discovered she was on the phone to a man called Tony Dyson who was in the tower. I knew him well, and so I took the phone from the lady and said in distress, 'Tony, I'm sorry, I can't do anything. No one can. The firemen are all here and they won't be able to get to you.' He then told me he was locked in the bathroom in his flat. He had tried to open the door of his flat, but the handle was red hot. He told me that the concrete under the ground was burning his feet. Then all of a sudden the line went dead. Tony was someone I'd gone to school with and had grown up with. I knew him and his entire family. To hear him die over the phone like that will haunt me forever. He and the others should never have died." And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Right. Thank you very much.
So I would now propose to turn to the statement of Marion Telfer, and the reference for that statement is IWS 1182. This is a statement that consists of 5 pages, and if we turn to the 5th page, it is signed and dated the 14th of March 2018 under a statement of truth, and I'd ask the entirety of that statement admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
Miss Telfer was the niece of Mary Mindy and the cousin of Khadija Say. They both Mary Mindy and Khadija Say lived in flat 173 on floor 20, and they both sadly passed away in the fire. Miss Telfer, I would pick up Miss Telfer's statement from paragraph 5 on page 1, and she says, "My Aunt Mary brought me up. She has always taken responsibility for me, and I regarded her as a mother. I lived with her and Khadija, who I regard as my sister. I was born in Banjul. My mum, Betty Mindy, and my dad were not together, and I lived with my mum until I started nursery, and then for some time with my dad. When I returned to my mother's family, it was my Aunt Mary who basically took responsibility for me. She valued having children and treated me as her own. We lived in what might be described as communally." I would then continue from paragraph 10 on page 2, where Miss Telfer gives her account of the events of the 14th of June. She says, "On the night of the fire, I had a day off from work. I always have the news on and usually sleep with the TV on. That night, I turned off the TV when I went to bed. I woke up about 5 a.m. the following morning, and I saw I had lots of missed calls. I wondered why so many people had been calling me. The first person I called was my mom to ask why she had been calling me insistently. She said, 'My sister is dead.' I turned on the TV to watch Sky News. I didn't believe what I saw. I got dressed. My partner asked me what I was doing. I told him I was going to look for my aunt. It was around 6 a.m. I got the train. I couldn't get a bus from Notting Hill, so I walked to Ladbroke Grove. The building was still burning. I just couldn't believe it. I was in shock. I was looking up at where Aunt Mary's flat was. I knew exactly where it was. I used to live there. I knew she and Khadija would not have made it. Khadija would normally call me for help. I called Khadija once I arrived at the scene, and I knew Khadija was gone, as there was no way Khadija wouldn't answer her phone. I was crying, calling Aunt Mary and Khadija. I then went to every single registration point to look for them." Now, I'd then propose to pick up her statement again at page 4, paragraph 21. As Miss Telfer said, she used to live with her Aunt Mary in Grenfell Tower, and she gives her account on page 4 and 5 of that time. She says at paragraph 21, "I don't remember us really having any problems there. I do remember that there was a fire once. I was with Khadija in the flat. Aunt Mary was out. I heard the fire alarm and smelled smoke. I got Khadija and we ran. I think I was about 11 or 12 years old. We went down to the foyer and stayed with the security guards who were always in the foyer. We had a smoke alarm in the flat, but the alarm that sounded and I heard was a central alarm. I don't remember anyone telling us about a stay put advice at the time. I would then pick up again at paragraph 25, where she says, following the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower, the floors got renumbered. We used to live on the 17th floor, and then their floor numbers got changed to 20th. I remember going to visit and getting off at the 17th floor and knocking on what I thought was their door, and another woman opened the door. I said to her, "You're not my aunt." Meanwhile, my aunt was phoning me and saying it's the 20th floor now. Aunt Mary was proud when the refurbishment was completed. She told me she thought the building looked pretty. I remember she had what I think is a fire door put in after the refurbishment, and it closed automatically. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Yes, very well, thank you.
The second statement that I propose to read today, related to Mary Mendy and Khadija Say, is that of Miss Clary Mendy, and the reference for that statement is IWS 1185. Now, this statement consists of 6 pages, and turning to the 6th page, you will see that it's signed on the 25th of September 2018 under a statement of truth. I'd ask the entirety of that statement is admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
At paragraph 2, page 1, Miss Mendy says, my relatives, namely Mary Mendy and Khadija Say, were victims of Grenfell Tower fire. They lived on the 20th floor, flat 173 of the tower. I then propose to continue at paragraph 5 on page 2 of the statement. Miss Mendy continues, I frequented the Gambia from 1979. I first met Mary as well as the other cousins in 1980. She was like my sister for so many years prior to her moving to the UK, and we had a very unique bond. It was my father who brought Mary to UK. He signed her paperwork and arranged her visa to come to the country. Mary moved to the UK and lived at my family residence with my father and my family member in approximately 1986 to 1987. Mary stayed in our family home until she found her own place and moved on. I always spoke to Mary a lot on the phone, and I would always see her at family occasions, such as my parents' death anniversaries, which we commemorated every year, and celebratory events. Khadija, Mary's daughter, was very shy. I would say she was more introverted than extroverted. She was artistic, but I never got the chance to see any of Khadija's artwork. I knew she was an aspiring artist destined to be an exceptional and prominent figure in her profession. She was the apple of her mother's eye. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Thank you very much.
I now propose to turn to the statements of the bereaved of Amal Ahmedin, Mohammed Nur Tuku and their daughter. And the first statement I will read is that of Miss Firuza Afewerki, and the reference is IWS 331. This statement consists of 4 pages, and on the 4th page you'll see it's signed on the 21st day of May 2018. And I'll ask the entirety of that statement is put into the record.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Now, Miss Afewerki, Miss Firuza Afewerki, her sister was Amal Ahmedin, who lived on the 19th floor of Grenfell Tower in flat 166 with her husband Mohammed Nur Tuku and their 3-year-old daughter Amaya. Amal Ahmedin's cousin, Amna Mahmood Idris, was staying with them on the night of 13th June 2017, and all 4 members of the family passed away in the fire on the 13th to 14th of June. I propose to pick up from paragraph 4 of the statement on page 1, where Ms. Afewerki says, I often visited my sister for birthdays and other celebrations. She always had people over at her house. She was a people person and very popular. I loved her deeply. My niece was a bundle of joy. Amal gave her the best that she could. I would then propose to turn to page 2 of the statement, where Ms. Afewerki gives her account of where she was on the 13th and 14th of June. She says at paragraph 13, at the time of the fire, I was in Jerusalem on a trip with friends. On the second to last day of the trip, I was in a coach when someone at the beginning of the day went to the front of the coach to share a thought for the day and some warm words. They explained that there had been a fire in Notting Hill Gate. I grabbed my phone and immediately panicked. I did not think, though, that it was my sister's place, as they lived elsewhere. I could not get any more information on the internet either. Sometime after, I saw Grenfell mentioned on the internet, and I screamed. I telephoned Amal immediately, and it went straight to voicemail. Those few hours afterwards are a blur. It was horrible. I felt so powerless. My dad called me. He said that as we do not know anything, we should not worry yet. He said he could not say it was okay, however. I tried to convince myself that she had run out and was okay. I said it to myself over and over. I said she is a fighter and she does not let anything get in her way. She was invincible. I thought she is probably in hospital. I could not imagine her being dead. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Yes, thank you.
The inquiry has also received the statement from Ibrahim Tuku. The reference
Yes.
for that statement is IWS 335. Mr. Tuku was the brother of Muhammad Nur Tuku, who we have just heard passed away in the fire at Grenfell Tower with his family. And Mr. Ibrahim Tuku has provided a statement that consists of 7 pages. On the 7th page, you'll see that it's signed on the 21st of May 2018 under a statement of truth, and I would ask that statement is admitted into the record.
Yes, of course.
Now, I would propose to pick up from his statement at paragraph 7, page 1, where he gives his account of learning about the events at Grenfell Tower. He says, on the 14th of June 2017, I received a call from my older sister who lives in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. She called me to let me know about the fire. At the time, the fire had started and was still going on. Mohammed Noor was visiting Amal and Amaya at the flat, as he actually lived in a flat in Lambeth. I was trying to call my brother and the phone was ringing, but he was not answering, so I did not get to speak to him. I also tried to call his friends in London and one of our relatives, Musallam, who lives in London. No one was picking up the phone, so I was worried. I don't remember when I last spoke to Mohammed Noor. It could have been a day or two before the fire. And this is where I propose to stop with this statement. As with the others, the entirety of the statement is admitted into the record.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Hisham Rahman lived in flat 204 and also passed away in the fire at Grenfell Tower. His relatives have provided statements about
Yes.
the events of the night. The first statement of Mr. Hisham Rahman's relatives that I propose to read is that of Muhammad Ragab,
Yes.
and the reference for that statement is IWS 477. This is a statement that consists of 4 pages, and turning to the 4th page, you'll see there's a signature and signed on the date on 26th of May 2018 under a statement of truth, and I would ask the entirety of that statement admitted into the record.
Yes.
Mr. Ragab is a former resident of Grenfell Tower. He lived there from 1982 to 1995, and when he moved into a property, it was about 5 minutes away from Grenfell Tower. Hisham Rahman is Mr. Ragab's nephew, and Hisham Rahman moved into the tower in 2012. I would propose to pick up his statement at paragraph 4 on page 1,
Right.
where he says, on the 14th of June 2017, at around 2:45 a.m., I received a call from my sister Shafiqa Ragab. I was at home in bed asleep at the time. She told me there was a fire at Grenfell Tower. I was immediately worried for Hisham, who lives in the tower. I got out of bed, got dressed, and made my way to her address, which is close by to the Grenfell Tower, and only a 2-minute walk from my flat. As I left my house, I saw there's a big fire coming from the 4th floor of the tower. I was completely shocked at the size of the fire. I thought, how is this possible? How can this be happening? I was really desperate to find out if Hisham was okay. I found Shafiqa outside her house. She told me she had already called Hisham and spoken to him. After I arrived, I called Hisham again and spoke to him for around 2 or 3 minutes. I heard her telling him to get out of the flat. She told me Hisham would not move from his flat as the police had told him to stay put and they would come and get him. Hisham has 2 mobile phones. I called Hisham myself at 3:33 a.m. on his number, as we had not heard from him since Shafiqa had called him around 15 minutes before. There was no answer. This made me really anxious, as I could see that the fire was getting bigger and was spreading. I hoped desperately that he had been saved and was in an ambulance at the bottom of the tower. Me and Shafiqa were both going mad with worry, and we did not know what to do. Shafiqa was crying and screaming. I decided to leave Shafiqa to try and go closer to the tower and find out what was going on, and to see if Hisham had managed to get out of the building. I could not get anywhere near the tower. There are 2 routes to access the tower, but the police were blocking both routes. I saw ambulances near the tower and people being pushed in wheelchairs to the ambulances so they could be taken to hospital. I also saw around 10 to 15 fire brigade vehicles near the tower. I tried to get past the police to the fire brigade so that I could find out whether Hisham would be rescued. The police would not let me past and told me to stay out. I shouted at them that my nephew was in the tower, but they did not provide me with any information. I felt completely helpless. After unsuccessfully trying to get information, I returned to Shafiqa, who was still outside her house. At 5:43 a.m., I called Hisham again, and again there was no answer. I then tried to call him on his other mobile number at 5:44 a.m. Again, there was no answer. I was really panicking now, as it had been hours since we'd heard from Hisham. It was a very long night for me and Shafiqa. We did not know what we were watching as we looked at the building on fire, as we did not know if Hisham had made it out of the building. It was worse than anything I could have imagined, and I still hoped Hisham had made it out of the building, as he had told Shafiqa the police would come and get him. However, we had not heard anything, and so we were both tearing ourselves apart with worry. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Right, thank you very much.
Now, you've heard Mr. Mohammed Ragab referred several times to Shafiqa Ragab.
Yes.
She has also provided a statement to the inquiry. The reference for that statement is IWS 475. Now, this statement, Ms. Ragab, is the sister of Mohammed Ragab, who we've heard from. And in her statement, which consists of 6 pages, you'll see that it's signed on the 5th page, on the 26th of May 2018, under a statement of truth.
Yes.
Ms. Ragab has given her account of the events of the night, and I picked those up at page 2, paragraph 5. She says, on the night of the fire, I was at my house with my brother Mohammed. We had been eating and drinking together. At 12:30 a.m., Mohammed left my house to go home and sleep. I stayed up for a while longer so that I could tidy the kitchen and the rest of the house. I was going to bed at around 2:30 to 2:40 a.m. on 14th June 2017 when I heard the noise of sirens of ambulances from outside my house, as well as other noise coming from my neighbours on the street outside my house. I looked out of my window and saw that many of my neighbours had come out into the street and were talking. I opened the window and asked my next-door neighbour from number 6 what was happening. My neighbour informed me that Grenfell Tower was on fire. I was shocked when I heard this. I immediately thought of my nephew Hisham because he lived in the building. It made me worry for Hisham. I went outside into the street to see what was going on, and I could see the fire on the tower from my street. It looked like the fire was coming from the low down in the tower, around the 4th floor. There was lots of smoke, and I could see big flames coming from the fire. The fire was spreading fast up the building. I started to panic as I could see that the building was on fire, but I did not know what was happening to Hisham. I telephoned my brother Mohammed at around 2:45 a.m. and I told him about the fire. He came to meet me outside my house straight away. I was so scared for Hisham, so I called him on his mobile phone at 2:59 a.m., shortly before Mohammed arrived. Hisham answered the phone. I was relieved to hear his voice, but when he answered, I was still panicking, as I wanted him to get out of the building. He was on his own in his flat, which is on the 20th floor of the Grenfell Tower, which is the highest floor of the tower. I shouted at him in panic, "Hisham, get down, the building is on fire." He said, "I'm coming, Mummy, but I have to wait." He said, "I've spoken to the police and they are coming to get me." He also said, "I've told the police that I've got problems with my feet and I can't walk. And the police told me, don't worry, stay where you are and we will come and pick you up." He suffers from diabetes and has a problem with his feet, meaning he would have struggled to run downstairs from the top floor of Grenfell Tower. He sounded scared as he spoke to me. I just pleaded with him to get out of the building as it was on fire. I did not want him to stay in there, as I could see how big the fire was. He said he would do his best. The call ended after around 2 or 3 minutes. I called him again, not long after the first call at 3:15 a.m. on his mobile phone. Mohammed was with me by this point. Hisham answered the phone again. He said he was still waiting for the fire brigade to come and get him. He told me the smoke started to get me. I don't know what to do. Please end the call so that my battery doesn't run out. When I come out, I'll call you. He did not specify exactly where from the smoke was coming from. Again, he sounded scared. The call ended again after around 2 or 3 minutes. I believe the phone call was cut off. That was the last time I spoke to Hisham. Mohammed then tried to call Hisham on his phone at 3:33 a.m., but he did not pick up this time. This made me really anxious. I hoped he was not answering his phone as he'd been saved and been taken to an ambulance, but I had no way of knowing if this was true. I was desperate to hear from him, to know he was safe. Without news from Hisham, I was beside myself with worry. Mohammed left me and approached the tower to try and find out what was going on. I was left in the street outside my house watching as the fire continued to engulf the tower. It was awful. I did not know what to do. I felt completely helpless. I was going mad as I watched the tower on fire, as I did not know whether Hisham was in there or not. I was crying with fear for Hisham. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Right, thank you.
The final statement related to Hisham Rahman is that of Noha al-Baghdadi.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Baghdadi has provided a statement with reference IWS 671. And you'll see on page 5 of that statement, it consists of 5 pages. It's signed on the 8th of June 2018 under a statement of truth. I'd ask the entirety of the statement submitted into the record.
Yes.
And if I could then turn to paragraph 2 of the statement, Ms. Baghdadi says, on 14th June 2017, I was at home asleep when I was awoken at around 5 a.m. by the notification sound from the Sky News app on my phone. The notification said there was a fire at Grenfell Tower. As soon as I saw the words Grenfell Tower, I was immediately worried, as this was where my cousin Hisham lived. Hisham had been brought up by my mother, and he was more like a brother to me than a cousin. We were very close. That's where I propose to stop with that statement. Ms. al-Baghdadi continues in a statement to set out her experience of trying to find out more information about Hisham Rahman on the night of the fire. And that's all been carefully considered by the inquiry.
Right, thank you.
So I note that we've been going for nearly an hour now, and we are halfway through the list of statements I propose to put into the record. I wonder whether...
How's your voice holding up?
I wonder whether a brief pause of 5 minutes might be convenient at this time.
Well, that seems reasonable. Should we say 10?
I'd be grateful.
Right, all right, 10 minutes. 3:05, please. Thank you. Yes, are we ready to go on?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Thank you.
I
Where are
now-
we going next?
I now propose to read into the record the statements of the relatives of Miss Sakina Afri-Sahabi and her sister Fatima Afri-Sahabi.
Yes, good. Thank you.
The first statement that I will refer to is that of Miss Mona Aglani, and the reference to that statement is IWS 774.
Yes, thank you.
This statement consists of 8 pages, and if we turn to page 8, you'll see that it's signed on and dated the 28th of June, 2018, under a statement of truth, and I'd ask that statement is admitted into the record.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
There are also 4 photos that have been exhibited to the statement with references IWS 774 page 9 to IWS 774 page 12, and I'd ask these are also admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
Miss Aglani is the daughter of Sakina Afri-Sahabi and the niece of Miss Fatima Afri-Sahabi, and they both died in the fire on the 14th of June 2017. Miss Mona Aglani has provided a statement to the inquiry, and I'd refer to page 6, paragraph 20, where she gives her account of learning about the events of the night.
Yes, thank you very much.
Now, she says at paragraph 20, on the night of the fire, I was at my mother's place. It was a hot summer's night. We had had a nice day. We were laughing. We had bought tickets to go on holiday, and we would soon return to Iran, which she had always enjoyed. My auntie was over at her place. They asked me to show them an Iranian series for them to watch on TV. I had no sense that this would be the last time I would ever see them, or that I would lose them forever. My mum gave me a special takeaway dish of food to take with me. She gave her grandson a kiss before he left. Nazanin, who was also there, left, and I then left my mother's place at 9 p.m. to go back to my own flat, which is nearby. I was very tired and went to bed a short while after getting home. I'm aware that my auntie Fatima shared a video on Facebook at 12:30, which was very close to the start of the fire. Around 3 a.m., I woke to go to the toilet. I saw I had lots of missed calls from various people, some of whom I had not seen in a long time. I telephoned some such person who explained that there was a fire at the tower. I left straight away. I left without even remembering my son was in bed. I was crazy. I do not remember much after this. I got to the tower a short while afterwards. I was crying. I tried to get close. I took my shoes off and ran towards it. They did not let me through. They could not give me any information. During the night, I went to 5 or 6 different hospitals to see if they had any information. Some of them did not even know about the disaster at that point. By sunlight, I was going around the different churches to see if I could find my mother. I was so confused. I was desperate. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
All right. Thank you very much.
The next statement I propose to put into the record is that of Miss Nazanin Aglani, and the reference is IWS 1074. This statement consists of 13 pages, and turning to the 13th page, you'll see that it's signed on the 12th of September 2018 under a statement of truth, and I'd ask that's admitted into the record. Miss Aglani is the daughter of Miss Sakina Afri-Sahabi and the niece of Fatima Afri-Sahabi. She sets out the history in her statement of her mother moving into Grenfell Tower, and I'd ask that her statement is also put into the record.
Yes.
Finally, I'd refer to the statement of Muhammad Samimi, and that statement is reference IWS 298. This statement consists of 5 pages, and on page 3 of 5, it is signed on the 21st of May 2018 under a statement of truth, and I'd ask the entirety of the statement is put into the record.
Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Samimi is the son of Fatima Afri-Sahabi, who passed away in the fire, and his aunt is Miss Sakina Afri-Sahabi. I'd refer on page 2 of the statement, paragraph 9. I propose to pick up from his account of learning about the events of the 14th of June. He says, on the 14th of June 2017 at 9:20 a.m. Iranian time, about 5:50 a.m. UK time, I sent my mother a text message. The message was replying to a text message I had received from my mother on the 13th of June 2017. My mother's message conveyed the following sentiments. It is difficult to translate this accurately. Hi, my dear son. I hope you are not exhausted from your work. I hope that your studio refurbishment has gone well, and I hope that it brings you fortune and income, God willing. I had sent my mother photos of the refurbishment of my photography studio the night before. On 14 June, my message to my mother was, hello, thank you, mother. Thanks God, all my work is proceeding well. I did not receive a reply from my mother. I left work at 1:30 p.m. Iranian time, about 10 a.m. UK time, and went home for lunch. I saw a segment on the television news about a fire at a tower block in London, but I wasn't worried about this. I didn't think it could be my aunt's flat. I had never seen a photo of the building my Aunt Sakina lived in. Her previous building had been 3 stories high, and I didn't know that she lived in a tower block. At about 5 or 6 p.m. Iranian time, about 1:30 p.m. or 2:30 p.m. UK time, I was back at work when I received a phone call from my sister Mariam. She told me to come home urgently. When I arrived home, Mariam was pale and shaking. She told me that the tower block we had seen on the news earlier was Aunt Sakina's tower. He then says at paragraph 16, I'll just pick up again from there, my relatives in the UK were searching for my mother and aunt in hospitals, churches, and the local area. They were unable to find any trace of them. 4 or 5 days later, my mother and my aunt were announced amongst those who had died. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Right. Thank you.
Those are the statements of the relatives of Fatima Afrasiabi and Sakina Afrasiabi that I wish to put into the record today.
Yes.
I would then turn to the statements of relatives of Rania Ibrahim. Now, Rania Ibrahim died on the 23rd floor, and she lived in flat 203 of Grenfell Tower. Her sister is Saida Ibrahim, who has provided a statement with reference IWS 323. This statement consists of 19 pages, and turning to the 19th page, you'll see that it's signed on the 22nd of May 2018 under a statement of truth, and I would ask the entirety of the statement is admitted into the record. I'd pick up at page 1, paragraph 4. She sets out her relationship to Rania Ibrahim, and she says, I lost my sister Rania Ibrahim and her daughters Fetia Hassan and Hania Hassan in the Grenfell Tower fire. Rania and her daughters lived in flat 203 on the 23rd floor of Grenfell Tower. Rania's husband Hassan also lived there but was abroad for the 6 months leading up to the fire. I would then turn to paragraph 28 of her statement on page 8, where she sets out her recollections of the events of the 13th and 14th of June. Miss Ibrahim says, I was at my home that evening. My son was at Grenfell Tower at around 7 p.m. and he stayed there at Rania's flat until iftar time, so around 9 p.m. or 9:30 p.m. Thereafter, he left Grenfell Tower and went to pray Tarawih at the Al-Manar Mosque and probably finished prayer at around 11 p.m. or 11:30 p.m. Then returned to Rania's flat. Whilst in the flat, he helped Rania to measure the windows, and she was planning to buy a nice curtain for Eid. He left Grenfell Tower at around 12 midnight to come home. He had decided with Rania that he was going to spend the last 10 days of Ramadan sleeping in the mosque, so he was only coming back home to get his clothes. He had planned to pick these up and return to Grenfell Tower. A few minutes before 1 a.m., I received a call from my sister Hanan. She told me to check if Rania was okay, because one of the blocks near Grenfell Tower was on fire. Then at between 1 a.m. and 1:06 a.m., we received a FaceTime call from Rania. She was dressed in black, and it looked like she was in the dark. She was asking where my son was, and whether he was still in the tower. And then she informed us there was a fire in her block. She told us she didn't think she would be able to leave. My daughter called 999 as soon as we got off the phone to Rania. She called from my phone as hers wasn't working at the time. My number is, and this is redacted for the record, This would have been around 1:10 a.m. She called just once. The call was around 2 minutes long. I remember my daughter told me the operator was female. My daughter told the operator Ranya's details, flat number, and any other details she asked for. She said they are getting a lot of calls regarding the same matter and the fire brigades are already on their way. I think the advice was just to stay calm. When I found out there was a fire, I left everything and called a cab which took me straight away to the scene at Grenfell Tower. When I arrived, the fire still didn't reach the top floors, or not from where I could see. It still had not reached Aranya's flat when I saw the fire. I fell to the floor and the newspapers took a photo of me. My children stayed at home and my daughter kept trying to contact Rania. However, my daughter told me that when she saw the fire, she knew that Rania would not survive, as she could not take her children down the stairs. I believe that after my son left Ranya's flat, Rania started to put her children to sleep. She must have gone to sleep because she said in a Facebook video that she woke up because someone was knocking on her front door. It was just Rania and her 2 children in the flat initially, but around 4 other people from her floor entered her flat because her corner of the building was the only side that was not affected by the fire at the time. People from the flat opposite to hers came in, and she was offering help and offering people to come in. Their flats were already on fire. Rania was filming a Facebook live stream of the night. The video is about 6 minutes long. From the footage, it seems like the fire alarm was not working. I spoke to Rania on the phone and later watched the video in her Snapchat videos. I believe that the smoke must have come into the kitchen where the smoke alarm was located, as the kitchen window is always open, but it did not go off. My daughter spoke to Rania at about 1 a.m., 2:50 a.m. and 3 a.m. and did not hear an alarm at any point. My brother was one of the last people to speak to her, and he could also not hear an alarm. In her Facebook video, there's some kind of whistling sound, but it's not like an alarm. I still have Rania's video and Snapchat videos. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
All right, thank you very much.
The next statement I would propose to put into the record is that of Muhammad Abdul Hakim. The statement is reference IWS 19. It consists of 8 pages, and on the 8th page it's signed on the 5th of April 2018 under a statement of truth, and it asks it's admitted into the record in its entirety. There are 2 exhibits to the statement, MAH1, which the reference is IWS 17, and MAH2, reference IWS 18. Both are videos, and I'd ask that these 2 videos are also admitted into the record.
Yes.
Mr. Hakim's family lived in flat 142 on the 17th floor of Grenfell Tower, and he explains at paragraph 2 of his statement that his relationship to the residents of that flat. He says, I make this statement because my family lived at 142 Grenfell Tower on the 17th floor. My mother, Rabia Begum, my father, Kamri Mia, my sister, Husna Begum, and my 2 brothers, Muhammad Hamid and Muhammad Hanif, all passed away in the fire. I am a core participant of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry. I would then turn to paragraph 13. That's where I propose to pick up from his statement, where he gives his account of the recollections of the events of the 14th of June.
Yes.
Just before paragraph 13, he explains that he was getting ready for bed when he got a phone call from his cousin at around 1:57 a.m. And he continues at paragraph 13. At 1:57 a.m., my cousin, who is my first cousin on my mother's side, called me. Normally, I don't expect a call at around 2 a.m. from anyone, so I was shocked when she called this late. I could see her name flashing up on my phone screen. Something clicked straight away. I knew it couldn't be good news. I always spoke to her in the day whenever we spoke, but we only spoke occasionally, here and there. I answered the phone and said, "Hey, cuz, are you okay? Is everything okay? You're calling quite late." She said, "Yeah, I'm okay, but I've got some news to tell you." "Where are you?" I told her, "I'm at home." She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm about to go to bed." She told me to sit down, and I said, "You're worrying me." She said, "There's been a fire and your family are all trapped in their flat. They say that the flat is pitch black and they can't see anything. Me and your brother-in-law are heading there now. I thought this can't be. I left them all perfectly fine a few hours before. I didn't want to believe her. My second oldest niece, who's my first cousin's daughter from my father's side of the family, Jessie called me. She said, "Hi, are you okay?" "It's me, Jessie. I'm sorry that I'm calling you this late, but I've got some really bad news for you. Your parents' home is on fire, as well as Grenfell Tower, and my dad has been there for the last 10 to 15 minutes. He's taken a video of the building. I've sent the video to you on your phone so you can have a look at it." She sent this video to me via WhatsApp at 1:38 a.m. and I've exhibited it as MAH1. When I saw it, my heart just sank. I didn't know what to say or do. I started panicking. Straight after I got off the phone to Jessie, my cousin called me. He was shouting, "Where the hell are you? Where the hell are you? Your family's trapped in their flat. They're all going to die. The building is completely on fire." When I heard that, I felt 1,000,000 times worse. What can I do from here? I was in my flat, miles away, more than an hour and a half away. Unfortunately, I don't drive, so I called a minicab. At 3:08 a.m., just as I got into the cab and I was about to close the cab door, my sister Husna, the youngest of my siblings, called me. She said, "There's a fire and we are all trapped in our flat. You're my older brother. Please forgive me if I've ever hurt you. I don't think we're going to make it." And then she cut the call. I tried calling her back. I called my brothers, my mother, and my father, but the phones kept going on to voicemail. No one was picking up. I couldn't think of anyone else to call. I was sat in the cab with the door open, with one foot on the street and one inside the cab. The cab driver was Bangladeshi, so I spoke to him in Bengali, and I told him what was going on. I told him to drive as fast as he could. He said, "I have to drive legally, but I will go as fast as I can and take the shortest routes, because I do understand your situation, and I'm sorry. I pray that God saves them and they come out safely from the building." As I got there, I could see the smoke coming from the tower from miles away. As we got closer, the roads were blocked. They were blocked with police, ambulances, and huge crowds of people. I couldn't get through the crowds properly, but I managed to get as close as I could, just outside of Latimer Road Station, where I had a better view to see the tower. There were bits of debris in the roads. It was a black foam that came off the building. I think I got to the area outside the tower between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. I waited there for a good couple of hours. I couldn't get through the crowds. All sorts of people were asking me questions. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
All right, thank you very much.
The next two statements I propose to put into the record are those of relatives of the Al-Wahhabi families, both of whom, as you have already heard, were residents of the tower. Turning first to the statement of Amina Sher Yamlahi, the reference is IWS 956.
Yes.
It consists of 7 pages, and on the 7th page, you'll see that it's signed on the 11th of May 2018, and the statement of truth is on the 6th page, just before the signature.
Yes, very well, thank you.
I'd ask that statement's admitted into the record.
Yes.
Ms. Sher Yamlahi is the sister of Hanan Wahhabi, from whom we heard giving evidence on Thursday, the 8th of November 2018. And she's also the sister of Abdulaziz Al-Wahhabi, who sadly passed away with his family in the tower. Ms. Sher Yamlahi and her family live close to Grenfell Tower, and the bedrooms of her property overlook the tower itself.
Yes.
I would propose to pick up from paragraph 8 on page 2, where she gives her account of the recollections of the events of the night. Now, this is page 2 of the statement. Ms. Sher Yamlahi says, "At around 12:30 a.m. on 14 June 2017, I took a shower. My husband was lying down and Yusra was on the phone talking to her husband. When I came out of the shower, I sat at the dining table. At around 1:15 a.m., my daughter-in-law, Torea, called our landline. Our dining room does not look out into the tower, and so I was not aware that there was a fire and had not seen anything was going on. Although I could hear lots of sirens, I didn't think anything of this, because it is quite unusual to hear sirens. When I answered the phone, I was surprised that Tureya was calling me because it was so late. I thought it might be to do with Tureya's grandparents. Tureya asked me if I knew anything. I was worried and did not understand what she was asking me about. I told her I didn't know anything. Tureya sounded shaky, and I could tell something was wrong. I asked her to tell me what was going on. She was repeating the question, "Are you sure you don't know anything?" I said to her, "I swear I don't know anything." Then I asked her whether she had received news from Morocco, but she told me it was not to do with news from Morocco. She told me, "Grenfell Tower, where your brother and sister live, is on fire." I asked whose flat she was talking about, my brother's or my sister's. She told me the fire started at the bottom of the tower and was going up the whole tower. She said that Bilal was talking to Hanan, who was making her way out of the tower. She then said that my brother and his family were still in the flat. As I was talking to Tureya, I ran from the sitting room to the bedroom. I opened the curtains, and all I can remember is that my husband was lying on the bed and I was screaming at him that my brother and my sister were on fire. I screamed, ran downstairs, and told Yusra, who was still on the phone, to her husband about the fire. I told Yusra to stay at home while I went to the tower, but she wanted to come with me. I put on my headscarf and Yusra and I ran out. We live very close to the tower, about 2 or 3 minutes walk away, and we were running, so we got there very quickly. We were at Silchester Road by the Methodist Church and the new school, Kensington Aldridge Academy. When we got there, police officers were present and they wouldn't let us get any closer to the tower. We were very close to the tower, directly underneath it. I then proposed to pick up again at paragraph 11 of her statement.
Yes.
Shortly before that, she says that she meets up with Hanan outside the tower. And then she says at paragraph 11, "A short while later, we spoke to Fawzia, our sister-in-law, on the phone. I spoke to her while my brother Abdulaziz was speaking to the emergency services. I spoke with Fawzia a couple of times. I was sharing the phone with other family members. My sister-in-law said the fire was in their kitchen and was coming towards the sitting room. I asked her, 'Where is my brother?' She told me he was talking to the emergency services. As I was speaking with Fawzia, I could hear my brother's voice, and I could hear him speaking to the emergency services. Then I passed the phone to my sister Hanan. At some point, Hanan spoke to my brother Abdulaziz. He told her he had tried coming out of the flat with his youngest daughter and they'd made it to the stairs, but the smoke was too much, and he couldn't see where he was going. When Abdulaziz made this attempt, he was speaking to one of my sisters. She said to me that Abdulaziz had told my niece, Nurhuda, 'Don't be scared, talk to your auntie.' But it was too dark, so he turned back and returned to the flat. I think that Abdulaziz made a few attempts to leave. The emergency services told him to stay in the flat. A very short while later, we called my sister-in-law Fawzia again. I don't know what time it was. I lost track of time. We could see shadows in the sitting window of my brother's flat. Some people were standing by the window. We couldn't make out who it was. Fawzia said that the emergency services had told them to go to their bedroom and close the door. Fawzia said that they had been told to close the door and put something under the door to block the smoke. I said to her to get all the towels and blankets and wet them. I told Fawzia to cover the children and for them all to cover themselves under the blankets together. Fawzia called the children, and I could hear her saying to them, "Your auntie is saying to wet the blankets and cover yourselves." This was the last thing I heard my sister say. I then passed the phone to my brother-in-law, and he passed it to my sister, Asia. At some point, that call ended. After I had spoken to Fawzia, we had seen the lights going off at the sitting room window. We then tried to ring again. The phone would ring and ring, but no one would answer. We then tried my brother's phone, the house phone, and the children's phones, but no one answered. The phones were ringing and ringing. Our family stayed together outside the tower all night until the morning. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Yes, thank you very much.
The next statement I propose to read into the record is that of Ahmed Chella. The reference is IWS 1006. This statement consists of 4 pages, and you'll see on the 4th page it's signed on the 22nd of May 2018 under a statement of truth. I'd ask that statement submitted to the record.
Yes.
Mr. Chelat is the brother-in-law to Hanan Wahabi. Abdulaziz Al-Wahabi and Mrs. Sher Yemlahi, whose statement I've just read into the record. He and his family also lived close to Grenfell Tower. I would pick up from his statement at paragraph 6 on page 2. And this is where he gives his recollection of the events of the night.
Right, thank you.
He says, on the night of the fire, Geeta, who's his wife, which he's set up before, was attending to her elderly sick mother, who lived nearby. I was at our flat having my supper. I was in the kitchen when I heard the sound of sirens. I looked out of the kitchen window and I heard the sound of emergency services. I rushed to my bedroom window to get a better look, and when I realised it was in fact Grenfell Tower, I rushed to wake my children and to get to the tower immediately. As I was leaving my flat, I realised I didn't have anyone's phone number on me. My son hurried to the scene, and my daughter and I tried to call Hanan and our other family members. There was no reply. We kept trying until Hanan picked up the third time. Hanan informed us she and her family were safe, but that Abdulaziz was still inside. She told us to meet her outside the Methodist church. At this point, my daughter, grandson, and I rushed out and met Hanan and her family outside near the Methodist church. When we arrived, it was chaotic. We could hear the sounds of people inside the tower. People were screaming and crying outside. At this point, the fire had not yet reached Abdulaziz's flat. We continued to frantically call them. The police, however, arrived and moved us to nearby Kensington Sports Centre. There we met other members of the family, including Amina, Aisha, and their daughters. We called Fawzia together. When I spoke to her, she seemed calm. She informed us Abdulaziz had been on the phone to the fire services, who advised them to remain in the flat and not to leave. She believed that help was coming to them. I told them to quickly leave the flat. Several minutes later, when we rang Fawzia again, she explained that they were advised to move to a different room and close the doors as there was smoke sweeping through the main door and the gaps in the window frames. They were told to get blankets and cover themselves on the floor in this room. Fawzia's voice was becoming increasingly distressed. I'd seen Abdulaziz at the window waving for help. The telephone contact with Fawzia was eventually lost. This was the last time I saw Abdulaziz. The Portobello Rugby Club was open at this point, and we were all asked to move in there by the police. There was, however, no one inside. No one we could seek advice and information in relation to the fire, and what help and assistance was provided to those who remained inside. We still had some hope. There was, however, rumours circulating at this point about the fire generally, and Fawzia and the rest of the family in particular. There was a tense, frenzied environment with people searching for and frantically calling loved ones. We kept hearing different accounts from people. And this is where I propose to stop from this statement.
Right. Thank you very much.
The final statement that I propose to read into the record this afternoon is that of Mohammed Seba. This had initially been listed to be read into the record last week.
Yes.
But due to time, we're reading it in today.
Right, thank you.
Mr. Mohammed Seba is the son of Abdessalam Seba, and he's provided a statement with reference IWS 903. This statement consists of 3 pages, and it's signed on the 3rd page on the 30th of June 2018 under a statement of truth. I'd ask that the entirety of this statement's read into the record. I'd propose to read from his statement starting at paragraph 2, where he gives his recollections of the events of the 14th of June.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Seba says, on the 14th of June 2018, around 1:15 a.m., my sister called me telling me that the Grenfell Tower was on fire and that our dad's still in his flat. It was very shocking news for me, but I was not expecting the fire to be large in scale. I called my son and we drove from the Chelsea area where we lived towards the tower. As we drove, my legs were shaking and I was very worried. I just wanted to get there as soon as possible. The 10 to 15 minute drive was very long and painful, especially after I'd received a phone call from my dad asking me where I was and telling me that there was a fire in the building. He was upset, worried and nervous, and he said, "Those people set fire to us." He was referring to the flat above, flat 91, because he had so much stress and trouble from that flat in the last couple of years before the fire due to water leaks. His flat was flooded, destroying all his furniture and causing him trauma and stress. The TMO dealt with his case very badly and even tried to evacuate him against his wishes. No repair was done to the damage and no replacement of the furniture. The photos were provided to KCTMO. On our way to the tower, I was talking to my dad, trying to calm him and to assure him that everything will be okay. I wasn't aware of the scale of the fire at the time. I asked him to leave the building, even though I know it was impossible for my dad to escape in this situation without help and support from someone. He doesn't like to use the tower stairs at night, which are normally filthy and with poor lighting. As we approached the tower, we could see the smoke from far away. We parked near to the tower on Stoneleigh Street. There were a few ambulances and fire engines in the area. We rushed to the tower main door. Police were there and they refused us entry and pushed us away. At that time, I was with my dad on the phone and I told him that we were at the main door and that the police were stopping us from going inside. We tried to explain that my dad needed help to come out to safety. Their reply was that the firemen will help him out. We had a great expectation that my father will be safe as the fire hadn't reached his flat and we could see a few firemen around. We ran to the corner of the tower near the leisure centre where we could see my dad's flat. The fire was still far from his flat, but it was in many different locations on the tower, and we could see firemen on the fire engine's ladder and throwing water in some lower flats. It was a great concern for me because I could see the fire spreading from side to side. My dad was still alive. He was coughing, choking, having problems breathing, and saying, "I'm dying," and later his voice vanished. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the statements that I propose to read into the record today.
Right.
And the business for today.
Good. Well, thank you very much. And again, as I've said before, I'm very grateful to all those who've taken the time and trouble to make these statements. They will form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be put into the inquiry record, and will be very helpful together with all the other evidence that we receive.
So I understand that there's also an application for tomorrow to start at 9:30 a.m. As you'll be aware, we have quite a full schedule of witnesses, and I understand that application is to begin earlier.
You've been speaking to Mr. Millett, haven't you?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I understand that we've got a lot of work to get through tomorrow, and although I suspect no one likes to start early, I think in this case it's necessary to do so. So we will sit at 9:30 tomorrow. Sorry about that, but it's necessary. Good. Thank you very much. 9:30 tomorrow then, please.